They say the captain did it. Every documentary, every newspaper, half the world. The official report is 495 pages long. On the captain, it says 4 words. There is no evidence. None. Not one document, not one witness, not one line. And he cannot answer because he is at the bottom of the Indian Ocean with the 238 people he is accused of killing. So let me take you to the moment it happened, because the whole thing turns on 62 seconds, and almost nobody tells it properly. 19 minutes past 1 in the morning, over the Gulf of Thailand, a voice from the cockpit of a Boeing 777 says 6 words to Malaysian air traffic control. Good night, Malaysian 370. 62 seconds later, that aircraft is gone from every radar screen on Earth. And here is the part that should stop you, because it is the part the headlines skip. 2 of the people walking onto that aircraft were traveling on stolen passports. For 6 days, that was the biggest story on Earth. It was worth absolutely nothing. It did not crash. Not then. It kept flying for 7 more hours with 239 human beings on board, out into an ocean that 12 years and 5 searches have not been able to give back. Somebody was flying it. That much the evidence does prove. It has never proved who. So this file is going to do something nobody has done in 12 years. It is going to lay out every single piece of physical evidence that actually exists in this case. All of it. The 7 satellite handshakes, the 1 phone that touched a tower on the ground, the 30 pieces of wreckage that washed up on beaches 4,000 kilometers away, and the deleted fragments on a hard drive in a house in Shah Alam that are, and this is the part that will stay with you, the entire case against Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah. Every word written about him for 12 years traces back to that one thing. Wait until you see what was actually on it. Kuala Lumpur International Airport, a Friday night going into Saturday morning. It is the 8th of March, 2014, and the terminal has the particular quiet of an airport after midnight. The shops shuttered, the cleaners working the concourse, families half asleep across the seating. 227 people board a Boeing 777 for Beijing. 153 of them are Chinese nationals. 38 are Malaysian. There are 2 men traveling on stolen Italian and Austrian passports, which will consume the first week of the world's attention and turn out to mean nothing at all. They were migrants, not hijackers. There is a woman on board named Anne Catherine Daisy. Remember her name. She will matter more at the end of this film than anything else in it. 12 crew join them. In the left seat, Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, 18,365 flight hours, 33 years with Malaysia Airlines. A grandfather. In the right seat, First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, 27, 2,763 hours. This is one of his final training flights on the 777. The aircraft is 9M MRO. A 777-200ER, 12 years old, no significant defects. At 42 minutes past midnight, it lifts off runway 32 right and turns northeast for Beijing. 6 hours in the air, scheduled to land at 6:30 in the morning. For 39 minutes, everything is completely, boringly normal. At 7 minutes past 1, the aircraft's maintenance computer sends its routine data burst down to the ground. Engine parameters, fuel, position, everything nominal. It is scheduled to send another one 30 minutes later. That second transmission never comes. At 19 minutes and 29 seconds past 1, Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control hands the flight over to Vietnamese airspace. 39 minutes from now, this aircraft stops existing on every screen in the world, and nothing that happens in those 39 minutes explains why. And a voice from the cockpit says 6 words. Good night, Malaysian 370. That is it. That is the last thing any human being outside that aircraft ever hears from inside it. And here is the first thing you have been told that is wrong. For the first 2 years, the world quoted those words as, "All right, good night," clipped, casual, a little cold. Investigators, journalists, and documentary makers built character analysis on that phrasing. Malaysia eventually released the actual audio and corrected the transcript. The real words are standard, calm, textbook. There is nothing in them. But the correction never traveled. The myth had a 2-year head start, and it is still in circulation today. That is the pattern of this entire case, and I want you watching for it from here on. Something gets reported early, gets corrected quietly, and the correction never catches up. 62 seconds after those words, at 20 minutes and 31 seconds past 1, the transponder stops. A transponder is the box that makes an aircraft visible as an identified target, flight number, altitude, speed, to every civilian radar screen for hundreds of miles. Without it, a 777 is not invisible. It is just an anonymous blip if anyone happens to be watching the raw returns. Nobody was. And look at where it happened. Waypoint Igari, over the Gulf of Thailand. That point is the boundary. Kuala Lumpur has just handed the flight away. Ho Chi Minh has not yet taken it. For about 2 minutes, that aircraft belongs to nobody's screen and nobody's responsibility. Whoever or whatever silenced that aircraft did it inside a 2-minute window in a 6-hour flight, at the one geographic point on the entire route where nobody was legally watching. That is either the most precise coincidence in aviation history, or it is not a coincidence. Ho Chi Minh Control waited, then queried, then waited again. It took Malaysian authorities more than 4 hours from that moment to declare an emergency and activate rescue. Somebody watched this happen, live, on a screen. Nobody moved. 4 hours. Here is what nobody knew for over a week because the search was in the wrong sea entirely. Malaysian military primary radar, the kind that does not need a transponder, that just paints raw metal, recorded an unidentified target immediately after MH370 vanished from civilian screens. That target turned, hard left, back across the Malay Peninsula, directly over the country the aircraft had taken off from. It crossed the coast, tracked over Penang Island, then turned northwest up the Strait of Malacca. The last time military radar saw it was at 22 minutes past 2 in the morning, near a waypoint called Mekar, roughly 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang. Now hold two facts side by side. Malaysian military radar watched an unidentified aircraft fly the length of the country in the middle of the night. And nothing happened. No jet was scrambled. No alert was raised. The operators saw it, classified it as non-hostile, and let it go. Meanwhile, for 6 days, ships and aircraft from 9 countries searched the South China Sea, the wrong side of the peninsula, because the information sat inside a military system and did not come out. That radar track is why we know the aircraft did not simply fall out of the sky at Igari. Somebody or something flew it for another 7 hours. As the aircraft crossed Penang, something happened that has never been fully explained. A mobile phone belonging to First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid briefly registered with a cellular tower on the ground. Not a call, not a message. A registration, the automatic handshake a phone performs when it comes within range of a network and says, in effect, "I am here." Think about what that requires. For a phone to reach a ground tower from an airliner, the aircraft has to be low enough, and the phone has to be switched on and out of flight mode. On an aircraft that had deliberately gone dark 40 minutes earlier. The system that made those pulses was never built to find anything. It was built to ask one question once an hour. Are you still switched on? One phone out of 239 people. There are readings of this that are innocent. A phone left on by accident in a pocket. An altitude low enough for a single fleeting connection. And there are readings of it that are not innocent at all. 12 years on, nobody has closed it either way. And then, MH370 leaves every radar on Earth. And for the next 6 hours, the only thing in the universe that knows it still exists is a communications satellite over the Indian Ocean that was never designed to find anything. The aircraft's satellite terminal had one function left running. Roughly every hour, the ground station would ask, "Are you still logged on?" And the terminal would answer, "Yes." No position, no altitude, no speed, just a pulse. 7 of those pulses were exchanged between 1:30 in the morning and 19 minutes past 8. British engineers at Inmarsat then did something that had never been attempted. Each pulse carried a tiny distortion. The frequency shifted very slightly depending on the angle and speed of the aircraft relative to the satellite. From distortions in a signal that was only ever meant to say, "Yes, I am here," they reconstructed arcs across the planet. The final one is called the 7th arc. It runs down the southern Indian Ocean, and everything humanity has done in this case since, every ship, every submersible, every $100 million, has been an attempt to find one aircraft along one line on a map, derived from 7 pulses. Which means the honest version of this story is, we do not know where MH370 is. We know where the mathematics says it ran out of fuel. Those are not the same sentence, and the difference between them is why 5 separate searches have now failed. So we come to it. The reason a 53-year-old man with 33 years of clean service is, in the public mind, a mass murderer. Everything the world believes about this man fits on one deleted file. Wait until you see how small it is. In the weeks after the disappearance, the FBI was given a copy of the hard drives from Captain Zaharie's home flight simulator, a large, elaborate rig he had built himself in his house in Shah Alam, and which he used to post videos online showing other people how to fix their air conditioning and their appliances. The FBI recovered fragments of deleted data. Among them were a small number of position points from a simulated flight, saved and then deleted about 6 weeks before the disappearance. Those points went northwest up the Strait of Malacca and then south out into the southern Indian Ocean. That is it. That is the evidence. Now let me tell you the 4 things about that hard drive that the documentaries do not tell you, and I want you to weigh each one. First, it was never a saved flight. It was not a route file, not a plan, not a flight anybody could open and press play on. It was fragments recovered from deleted space, the digital equivalent of pulling torn paper out of a bin. Second, the Australian analysis described the simulated route as initially similar to the path MH370 is believed to have taken. Initially. The points then diverge. The simulated flight does not end where the aircraft is believed to have ended. Third, Malaysian police, who examined the same equipment, concluded there was no unusual activity on that simulator. And fourth, this is the one that should stop you. Zaharie flew that simulator constantly and had flown thousands of simulated routes on it. Investigators pulled fragments of many flights off those drives. One of them went south into the Indian Ocean. That is the case. Not a note, not a message, not a financial motive, not a medical record, not a psychiatric history, not a witness, not a single human being who came forward in 12 years to say they saw something in him. A deleted fragment on a hobbyist's hard drive of a flight over the ocean he lived beside. Zaharie Ahmad Shah joined Malaysia Airlines in 1981 at 20 years old and never worked anywhere else. He was a training captain, which means the airline trusted him to certify other pilots. There are videos of this man online explaining how to service an air conditioning unit. You can still watch them today. He is patient and slightly boring, and he is the most famous mass murderer in the world. He had 18,365 hours in the air, roughly 2 full years of his life spent flying. He had 3 children and a grandchild. He liked cooking. He built the simulator in his living room and filmed himself demonstrating, in careful Malay-accented English, how to service a domestic air conditioning unit and how to waterproof a window frame. Those videos are still online. You can watch a dead man explain, patiently, at length, how to fix a fan. In the days after the disappearance, journalists went through everything. His politics were reported as a motive. He supported an opposition figure who had been sentenced the day before the flight. That claim was investigated and produced nothing. His marriage was reported as a motive. That produced nothing either. His last words were reported as cold. That was the misquote. Every single line of the case against this man has been examined by a formal investigation, and every single one of them came back empty. And yet, if you ask 100 people on the street today what happened to MH370, most of them will tell you the pilot did it. That is not an investigation. That is a story that won. There is a part of this aircraft nobody talks about, and it is directly underneath the passengers. MH370 was not just carrying people. In the cargo hold, on the manifest, was a consignment of fresh mangosteens, 4.5 tons of fruit, loaded in Kuala Lumpur, bound for a market in Beijing. And alongside the fruit, 221 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries. Lithium batteries are the reason you are told, every single flight of your life, to keep your power bank in the cabin and not in your checked bag. When a lithium cell fails, it does not simply burn. It enters what engineers call thermal runaway. It generates its own oxygen as it burns, which means a conventional fire suppression system cannot smother it because it is not taking oxygen from the air around it. It makes its own. The batteries on MH370 were not declared as dangerous goods. Under the rules in force at the time, they did not have to be. They were screened, they were packed, they were loaded, and they were legal. This explanation fits the first 15 minutes better than anything else in this film. And then it dies, on one detail. Now put that in the same aircraft as everything you have already heard. A cargo fire in the forward hold would sit directly below the main electronics bay, the room where the aircraft's communications and transponder systems live. A fire there could take out the transponder and the maintenance data link. It could fill the cockpit with smoke and force a crew to turn back toward the nearest long runway, which is exactly what a turn toward Penang would be. And smoke and fumes could incapacitate everyone on board while the autopilot kept flying. It fits the first 15 minutes almost perfectly, and then it stops fitting because of one detail. 6 weeks after this flight, the international rules changed, and bulk shipments of lithium batteries were banned from passenger aircraft. That change was not made because of MH370. It was already in motion. But it tells you the industry already knew what these things could do, and it still could not explain 6 more hours of steady, deliberate flight afterwards. A fire does not fly an aircraft for 6 hours. Something else did. Which leads to the version of this story that almost nobody outside aviation has ever heard, and which is, structurally, the strongest competitor to the pilot theory. It is called a ghost flight. Imagine the cabin loses pressure at 35,000 feet. Not explosively, slowly. At that altitude, the time you have between the pressure dropping and losing the ability to think clearly is measured in seconds, not minutes, seconds. The passenger oxygen masks that drop from the ceiling carry roughly 12 to 20 minutes of supply. They are designed for one thing only, to keep people alive while the pilots descend to breathable air. They are not survival equipment. They are a countdown. The crew have better bottles, but if a crew is dealing with smoke or a failure, or is already impaired before they realize what is happening, that advantage disappears. And here is what makes it terrible. A modern airliner does not fall out of the sky when the people inside it stop functioning. The autopilot holds heading. The engines hold thrust. This is not a theory. It has happened twice, and both times, fighter pilots flew alongside and watched it happen. The aircraft flies on, perfectly stable, at cruising altitude, carrying everyone aboard until the fuel runs out, and then it comes down. This has happened before, and not as a theory. In 1999, a Learjet carrying the golfer Payne Stewart lost pressurization over Florida and flew across 4 American states with a dead crew, escorted by fighter jets whose pilots could see frost on the inside of the windows until it ran out of fuel and crashed in South Dakota. In 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 circled Athens for over 2 hours with an unconscious crew and a cabin full of unconscious passengers, shadowed by Greek F-16s, before it too ran dry and went into a hillside. Now apply that to MH370. A depressurization at the exact moment the aircraft was between control zones. Everyone aboard unconscious within a minute. A 777 with full tanks for Beijing, flying on until the fuel is gone, roughly 7 hours. 7 hours is almost exactly the gap between the last radio call and the final satellite handshake. If that is what happened, then the 239 people on MH370 were already gone before Malaysia even knew the aircraft was missing, and everything since, every search, every theory, every accusation against a dead captain has been about an aeroplane that had been empty of the living for 6 hours. Now, I am not going to do to you what has been done to this case for 12 years, which is to give you one side and call it the truth. So here is the strongest version of the argument against him, stated as fairly as I can put it. That aircraft did not malfunction its way through what happened next. The transponder did not fail. It stopped, cleanly, inside a 2-minute handover gap. The turnback across Malaysia was not a drift. It was flown, through waypoints, by something making decisions. The satellite terminal went off and then came back on again, which is not the behavior of a broken system. And whatever was happening on board, it continued in a straight, stable, controlled flight for 6 more hours. A fire, a decompression, an electrical failure, the standard catastrophic explanations, struggle badly with 6 hours of controlled flight. 7 hours of fuel. 7 hours of satellite handshakes. Nobody has ever explained that away as a coincidence. Somebody was awake in that cockpit long after the passengers were not. That is real, and I will not talk you out of it. But hold on to the exact shape of it, because it is important. That evidence says a human being was in control of MH370. It does not say which human being. There were 2 pilots, 10 cabin crew, and 227 passengers on that aircraft, and a formal report that states third-party intervention cannot be excluded. The world took "somebody did this" and quietly replaced it with "the captain did this." Those are different sentences, and only one of them is supported. Now, into that vacuum, something predictable happened. When there is no evidence, the space does not stay empty, it fills. And the thing that filled it first was a detail from the passenger manifest that is completely true and completely misunderstood. 20 of the passengers on MH370 worked for the same company, Freescale Semiconductor, an American chip manufacturer. 12 of them were Malaysian, 8 were Chinese. They were engineers returning from work. Within days, that fact had become the spine of a theory that spread across the internet faster than any official statement. That the aircraft had been taken because of who was on it. That patents were involved. That a technology worth billions changed hands the moment those men were declared dead. And here is what makes this worth your time rather than a distraction. Every part of that theory collapses under 30 seconds of checking. Freescale was a large company with a large Asian workforce. Groups of its staff flew that route constantly. The patent claim was traced to a document that did not exist in the form described. No intelligence service, no investigator, no journalist with access to the file has ever found a thread of it that holds. But that theory has now been read by more people than the official report has, by a factor nobody can even estimate. That is the machinery this case runs on. 20 engineers on a plane is a coincidence. The evidence proves a human being was flying that aeroplane for 6 hours. It has never once proved which human being. 20 engineers on a plane, plus an absence of evidence, becomes a plot. And once a story is doing the work that evidence should be doing, it does not matter very much whether the story is true. only that it is available. Keep that in mind, because it is exactly what happened to the captain. And then there were the witnesses. On the morning of the 8th of March, 2014, the same morning, residents of Kuta Huvadhu, a small island in the southern Maldives, reported seeing a large jet flying unusually low over the atoll. Several of them described it independently. Some described colors on the fuselage. For a while, this was the most human piece of evidence in the entire case. Not a satellite pulse, not an arc. People standing on a beach, looking up. It does not survive either, and it is important to understand why. Because the reason is the same reason everything else in this case falls apart. The timing does not work. For MH370 to have been over the Maldives at the hour described, it would have had to fly a route and a speed that its fuel load could not support, and it would have had to cross busy airspace and radar coverage without being recorded anywhere else. The Maldivian authorities investigated and did not support the identification. The aircraft the islanders most likely saw was a scheduled domestic service. And yet, those witnesses were absolutely certain. They were not lying. They saw an aeroplane, which is the quiet horror of this entire investigation. Everybody involved is telling the truth as they understand it. The islanders, the journalists, the analysts, the documentary makers. And the sum of all that honest testimony has produced a story about a dead man that the evidence does not support. There is only one category of thing in this case that cannot be misremembered, misreported, or misread. And 16 months after the aircraft vanished, some of it started washing up on beaches. For 16 months after the disappearance, not one physical fragment of MH370 was ever found. The largest search in aviation history had produced literally nothing you could hold. This theory has been read by more people than the official report has. It is also completely wrong, and I can show you why in 30 seconds. Then, on the 29th of July 2015, a beach cleaner on the island of Reunion, 4,000 kilometers from the search zone, found a 2-meter piece of aircraft wing lying in the surf, encrusted with barnacles. It was a flaperon, a control surface from the trailing edge of a 777 wing. Serial numbers matched 9M MRO. After that, a private citizen changed the case almost single-handedly. An American lawyer named Blaine Allen Gibson stopped working, spent his own money, and simply started walking beaches. Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, Mauritius. He found pieces. Then he found more. Locals started bringing him things they had picked up years earlier and kept in their yards. More than 30 fragments have now been recovered along the African coastline and the western Indian Ocean islands. A handful are confirmed beyond doubt as MH370. And one of those fragments carries a piece of information that goes straight back to the cockpit. Analysis of the recovered wing components indicated the flaps were retracted when the aircraft hit the water. Retracted flaps mean nobody was attempting to land it. There was no controlled ditching, no gentle glide onto the surface. MH370 went into the Indian Ocean fast, and the debris field is small and scattered, and 4,000 kilometers from where anyone was looking, because it broke apart on impact. And there is one more thing that was lost in that first week, and it may be the reason this case has never closed. Both black boxes on a 777, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, carry an underwater locator beacon. It is a small cylinder bolted to the front of the unit. When it gets wet, it starts transmitting an acoustic pulse, once a second, that a ship towing the right equipment can hear from kilometers away through open ocean. The battery in that beacon lasts about 30 days. MH370 disappeared on the 8th of March. For the first 6 days, the search was in the South China Sea, the wrong side of the country. It took until the 24th of March for Malaysia to publicly confirm the aircraft had gone into the southern Indian Ocean. These witnesses were not lying. That is what makes the next 2 minutes the most important in this film. The first vessel with the right listening equipment did not reach the search area until the beginning of April. 26 of the 30 days were gone before anyone was in the right ocean with the right equipment. And then, in early April, the Australian ship Ocean Shield picked up acoustic signals. 4 of them. They were the right frequency range. They came from the right depth. For a few days, in April 2014, the world genuinely believed MH370 had been found, and search vessels concentrated on that patch of seabed for weeks. They were not from the aircraft. The signals were eventually assessed as not originating from the recorders at all, and the seabed beneath them was searched and found empty. The most promising lead in the history of the search consumed the last of the beacon window and led nowhere. By the time the tow ended, the batteries in those 2 beacons, assuming they had ever been underwater and working, were dead. Whatever they had been transmitting, they stopped. Everything since is sonar and mathematics. Nobody will ever hear MH370 again. They can only see it, and only if they happen to drive a submersible over the exact patch of ocean floor it is lying on. While all of that was happening at sea, something happened on land that the families have never forgiven. On the 29th of January 2015, before a single fragment of the aircraft had been found anywhere on Earth, Malaysia's Director General of Civil Aviation stood in front of cameras and formally declared the disappearance of MH370 an accident, and all 239 people on board presumed dead. The stated reason was procedural and, on paper, compassionate. A formal declaration unlocks the insurance and compensation machinery. Families cannot settle an estate, cannot claim, cannot legally close a life while a person is merely missing. But look at the sequence. The flaperon on Réunion would not be found for another 6 months. At the moment of that declaration, the total physical evidence that MH370 had crashed anywhere consisted of 7 satellite pulses and an arc drawn on a map. One of these fragments tells you what was happening in the final seconds. No satellite pulse can do that. This piece of metal can. The families in Beijing did not receive it as compassion. Some of them had learned their relatives were presumed dead by text message the year before. A short SMS from the airline stating that MH370 had been lost and there were no survivors. Now they were being told to accept an accident finding for an aircraft nobody had located, from an investigation that would later publish 495 pages, concluding it could not determine what happened. They refused. Groups of relatives in China rejected the declaration outright and kept refusing to accept compensation, on the grounds that accepting it meant accepting a version of events that had never been established. And this is the thread that runs through the whole case, from the misquoted final transmission to the deleted hard drive to that press conference. At every point where the honest answer was, "We do not know," an institution or a broadcaster reached for something cleaner. The families are the only people in this story who have consistently insisted on the uncomfortable one. Which brings us to the 239 people who have spent 12 years as a number in a headline. Anne Catherine Daisy was on that aircraft. Her daughter, Grace Nathan, was 26 years old when her mother did not arrive in Beijing. Grace is a lawyer in Kuala Lumpur. She is 38 now. In the 12 years since, she finished law school, opened her own firm, got married, and had 2 children, and her mother was at none of it. When Grace got married in 2020, she walked down the aisle carrying a photograph of her mother tucked into her bouquet. The bouquet was Daisy's. Grace Nathan became one of the faces of Voice 370, the next of kin group that has spent over a decade doing the work government stopped doing. Pushing for searches, reading technical reports, standing in front of cameras every March 8th, asking the same question and getting the same silence. And every time a documentary goes out that tells the world the captain murdered everyone on board, those families absorb it. So does Zaharie's family, who have lived 12 years inside an accusation that no investigation has ever supported. There are 2 sets of victims in this story, and only one of them gets counted. For 30 days, that aircraft was still calling. once a second from the bottom of the ocean. And nobody was in the right ocean to hear it. The numbers of the search are difficult to hold in your head. Australia led the first phase, sweeping 120,000 square kilometers of seabed over nearly 3 years, at depths where the pressure would crush a submarine. Nothing. Ocean Infinity, a private company, took over in 2018 on a no-find, no-fee basis and covered more than 100,000 square kilometers more. Nothing. Then, in December 2024, Malaysia agreed to try again. Ocean Infinity returned to the southern Indian Ocean with autonomous submersibles. They spent 151 days at sea. They mapped more than 140,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. On the 23rd of January 2026, they left the search area with nothing. And here is where this stops being history. There is one piece left. 7,428.54 square kilometers of seabed that has never been swept. The last unexamined ground consistent with the seventh arc. The Malaysian cabinet has approved an extension of the no-find, no-fee agreement through the 30th of June 2027. Ocean Infinity's vessels are expected to redeploy between November and April, when the Southern Ocean is survivable. $70 million, payable only if they find it, which means that within a matter of weeks, ships will go back out to the last unsearched water on Earth where that aircraft can be. And this is almost certainly the final attempt anyone will fund. If they find it, the recorders come up, and every question in this film gets an answer. If they do not, then the accepted version of what happened to MH370 becomes the permanent version. And the permanent version, right now, is a man convicted on a deleted fragment. 239 people. They declared 239 people dead 6 months before anybody found a single piece of that aircraft anywhere on Earth. 7 pulses from a satellite, 30 pieces of wreckage on African beaches, 1 deleted file. That is everything we have. The report said it could not determine the cause. It said there was no evidence against the captain. It said third-party intervention could not be excluded. 12 years later, the world has an answer anyway. And it is not the one the evidence gives. I told you at the start to remember a name. Anne Catherine Daisy. She was going to Beijing, and she is somewhere on the floor of the southern Indian Ocean, inside an aircraft nobody has ever found. Her daughter got married carrying her photograph in a bunch of daisies, and is still, 12 years on, asking a question that everybody else has already decided the answer to. She is not asking whether the captain did it. She is asking where her mother is.